I sat in a bankruptcy courtroom packed with strangers, not because I was out of money, but because my parents wanted the entire city to believe I was destitute. My mother wept into her silk scarf while my brother smirked, certain I would be humiliated publicly. Then the judge paused, looked up, and asked the one specific question that made their lawyer turn pale. After 8 years of silence, I knew my moment had finally arrived. My name is Hope, and I am 36 years old. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Drop a comment and let me know your story. I would love to know who is part of our community. Courtroom 7 in downtown Manhattan felt like a stage, and my family members were the lead actors. My father, Kevin, sat across the aisle with the rigid posture of a man posing for a statue. He has spent 40 years managing a multi-billion-dollar fund by shaking hands and drinking expensive scotch. And he expects the world to move at his command. Beside him, my mother, Kimberly, was dressed in a severe black that suggested she was mourning the death of my career. She dabbed at her eyes with a silk scarf that probably cost more than my first microscope. I looked at them and saw the library on the Upper East Side 8 years ago. It smelled of old leather and expensive lemon polish. I had presented them with a pitch deck for a biotech startup focused on regenerating coral reefs through synthetic biology. I was passionate and precise. I told my father that the market for clinical environmental science was projected to explode. He did not even look at my data. He just set his glass down with a soft click and called it a science project. He told me I was too emotional for business, and that I should just go work for my brother Tyler in compliance, where I could organize the files. Watching them now, I realized they were not being intentionally evil in their own minds. They had simply fallen into the trap of normalizing cruelty. In their world, children are not people, they are assets to be managed, or liabilities to be written off. Because I did not fit into their portfolio of gala invitations and country club status, I became a disposable asset. My father viewed destroying my reputation as just another business transaction, a necessary cost to keep their social standing intact. Sterling Vance, the lawyer who charges $600 an hour to dismantle lives, stood up. His voice was a rich baritone that filled the room without a microphone. He gestured toward me, as if I were a stain on the mahogany table. He claimed I had solicited a personal loan from my brother, Tyler, in the amount of $4,800,000. He told the judge that I was a reckless daughter who had squandered the family fortune on a failing science hobby. They wanted to paint me as the incompetent woman who played at business while the men handled the real capital. Tyler sat there smirking, the crown prince of a dynasty built on handshakes, while I had built my company with 18-hour days in a lab that smelled of salt air and ambition. They thought they were crushing a hobbyist. They did not realize that while they were busy maintaining the whispers of inherited wealth, I had been building a bunker. My lawyer, Elena Ruiz, did not look at me as she stacked 3 heavy banker's boxes on the table. The cardboard scraped against the wood, a low, industrial sound that cut through the silence. Elena's eyes were dark and devoid of fear. She looked at the judge and said that the narrative presented was compelling, but it lacked one critical element: the truth. She patted the top of the boxes and announced that we had prepared 3,000 pages of discovery that would paint a very different picture of why the family was so desperate to force my company into receivership. Tyler laughed, a short, sharp sound that was quickly stifled. He thought we were bluffing. He still saw me as the girl who hid in her room while he charmed the country club. I did not flinch when Sterling Vance pointed that accusing finger. In my head, I was not a victim. I was a forensic analyst watching a predictable error in a line of code. My family had spent 8 years convincing themselves I was a footnote in their story. They assumed my quietness was a sign of defeat, but they were wrong. My silence was a ghost protocol. It was the space I needed to build a life they could not touch, in a world they did not understand. For 8 years, I lived in what felt like a prison without bars. It is a strange psychological cage called learned helplessness. When you are told often enough that you are a failure, you start to believe the walls are real, even when the door is wide open. I did not stay away because I was scared. I stayed away because I was waiting for my foundation to become unbreakable. I was a survivor, not a runaway. I spent my nights in a cold laboratory on the outskirts of Philadelphia, doing the grunt work they thought was beneath them. I pulled cables through crawl spaces and sat in freezing data centers until my eyes burned. I learned that when a life support system crashes at 3 in the morning, nobody cares what your last name is. They only care if you can make the heartbeat return to the monitor. Elena leaned over and whispered that it was time to strip away the paint. She reached for the first of the 3 boxes. We were not just here to defend a bankruptcy, we were here to perform an audit on their lies. Vance had painted a picture of a reckless daughter, but we brought the turpentine. I looked at my father and felt nothing. No regret, no sadness. Just clarity. My mother's silk handkerchief was a prop, but my evidence was data. The plaintiff claimed I borrowed $4,800,000 to save a sinking ship. That was the big lie. The truth was that Northbridge Biotech was not only solvent, but it was currently one of the most secure financial entities in the state. I had spent 3 years ensuring our revenue streams were diversified and our debt was non-existent. I did not take their money, because taking a single dollar meant accepting their narrative. If I took their capital, I became the charity case they always said I would be. Instead, I ate instant noodles and walked 3 miles to save bus fare to ensure that every brick of my company was mine alone. Tyler shifted in his seat, his smirk finally beginning to look a little forced. He did not realize that the 3,000 pages Elena was arranging were not just legal documents, they were an indictment of the Hawthorne legacy. We had tax returns that matched our bank statements down to the penny. We had sworn affidavits from my actual investors, people who valued my competence over my bloodline. I had spent nearly a decade building a shell around myself that was harder than a diamond. And today, they were going to find out that you cannot crush what you do not understand. The air in the room grew heavy as Elena pulled a heavy, sealed plastic bag from her briefcase. My mother, Kimberly, let out a soft, audible sob right on cue, her shoulders shaking with the rhythmic precision of a metronome. She looked at me through her veil, with a performance of heartbroken disappointment, a masterpiece of gaslighting designed to tell the gallery that she had tried to save her wayward child. She whispered my name, asking how I could be so cruel to the family that gave me everything. But I knew the truth. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and today, their account was empty. Elena walked to the center of the room and placed a high-resolution image on the projector screen. It was the signature page of the alleged loan agreement. She explained that while my brother claimed this document proved a debt of $4,800,000, we were prepared to prove it was a roadmap to a crime. She pointed a laser at the ink. No person signs their name identically twice, yet this signature was a 100% match for a birthday card I had sent to my father 5 years ago. It was not written, it was a digital graft, a lazy forgery, designed by people who thought I was too much of a hobbyist to look at the metadata. Then, the floor dropped out from under them. Elena produced the transaction logs for the account Tyler claimed the funds came from. At the exact moment he allegedly wired me those millions, his primary checking account was overdrawn by $400.50. A ripple of shocked laughter went through the back of the room. The Crown Prince of Manhattan was cash poor and pretending to be a tycoon. But the true tarnish was not just in the forgery, it was in the notary seal at the bottom of the page. My mother's hand froze midair as Elena revealed that the commission for Kimberly E. Hawthorne had expired 8 years ago. My mother shot up from her bench, her face draining of color. She blurted out that she did not know, that the stamp must have been stolen from her desk. It was a fatal error. By claiming she did not remember stamping it, she admitted the seal was hers, and that she had lost control of it to the very people benefiting from the fraud. The judge looked at her with an expression of pity, mixed with disbelief. She was not just an observer, she was a co-conspirator who had used an expired state seal to validate a lie. The deeper twist hit like a tidal wave when Elena revealed the internal ledger codes found in the document's footer. This was not Tyler's money. The transaction coding belonged to my father's firm, Kevin's multi-billion-dollar fund. We discovered that my father was currently the subject of a secret audit regarding $4,800,000 that had gone missing from a medical trust fund. My grandmother had left for my own future. The realization turned the courtroom into a tomb. This bankruptcy was not about jealousy or a sibling rivalry. It was a cover-up. My father had embezzled my inheritance to pay for Tyler's gambling debts and failed investments. They needed me to be a failure. They needed to force my company into a public, chaotic bankruptcy so they could claim the missing millions had been loaned to me and lost in my science project. They wanted to write off their theft as a bad family investment. To save their own reputations, they were willing to cannibalize my life. My father sat perfectly still, his tanned confidence replaced by a sickly grayish pallor. He had spent years telling me I was a burden, but the truth was that he was the one who had turned our family into a liability. I sat there, watching the second hand on the wall clock, my breathing slow and intentional. To everyone else in that room, I was the defendant awaiting a verdict, but in my mind, I was a network administrator watching a honeypot trap. 2 days ago, I knew I had a rat in my house. Someone inside Northbridge Biotech was leaking my real-time data to my brother. I did not go on a witch hunt. I did not purge the servers. I just loaded a weapon with a very specific kind of ammunition. I issued a fake, highly confidential memo to my management team. It was titled, Confidential Asset Relocation Strategy, Philadelphia. I told them that because of the bankruptcy filing, we were secretly moving our primary research and the source code for our coral reef regeneration project to a private vault in Philadelphia on Friday at noon. There is no facility in Philadelphia. We have no operations in Pennsylvania. I had invented the entire strategy to see whose mouth would open first. I looked back at the gallery. Julian Myers, my lead project manager, was sitting 3 rows behind my father. He was not there for support. He was there to witness the payout. I had given Julian a $25,000 bonus last Christmas. I had trusted him with the keys to our digital kingdom, and yet, I had seen him in the parking lot 2 hours after that memo went out, pacing by his car with a phone pressed to his ear. He had traded 8 years of loyalty for a seat on a sinking ship. He thought he was jumping into a life raft, but he was actually handing Tyler the rope that would hang them both. My phone vibrated in my jacket pocket, a long, sustained pulse. I knew that rhythm. It was a high-priority alert from my chief information officer. I did not need to answer to know what it was. I had set a trigger on our hospital network clients. Within 10 minutes, a forward landed in my inbox. Tyler had sent an email to the chief information officer of our largest regional hospital network 20 minutes ago, while sitting right across the aisle from me. He had signed it as Trustee Tyler Hawthorne. He claimed that under a court-ordered seizure, he required the administrative passwords to the life support regulation servers immediately to verify inventory before the relocation to Philadelphia. He was so blinded by greed that he was launching a cyber attack from the plaintiff's table. He was impersonating a federal officer to hold a hospital's infrastructure hostage. Elena stood up smoothly, her dark eyes locking onto Tyler. She walked to the bench and handed a stack of papers to the bailiff. She told the judge that this was no longer a matter of debt collection, it was a criminal intervention. She presented the real-time email Tyler had just sent, complete with the digital headers. The judge's face turned into a mask of granite as he read the words. He looked at Tyler, then at the email, then back at Tyler. The smirk on my brother's face did not just fade. It evaporated. He looked confused, then terrified. Elena's voice was lethal as she pointed out the one word that proved the conspiracy: Philadelphia. She explained that the only reason that city existed in this entire case was because of a lie I had fed my project manager 48 hours ago. Tyler had not just committed wire fraud, he had proven that he had unauthorized access to our internal communications. He had just confessed to corporate espionage in an attempt to hijack a federal contractor. The room went silent, a heavy, suffocating silence that smelled of panic and the sudden realization that the crown prince was about to lose his head. The judge did not just bang his gavel. He slammed it with a force that sent a physical vibration through the heavy mahogany table. He looked at Tyler, then at Kevin, and his eyes were cold enough to find the hollow spaces in their souls. He leaned forward, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that picked up the bass in the courtroom's microphone. He asked my brother, with lethal precision, why a company that safeguards the national medical infrastructure was listed in his bankruptcy docket as a hobby. Tyler tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but his arrogance had finally run out of air. He looked at his lawyer, but Sterling Vance had already taken 3 steps back, physically distancing himself from the radioactive fraud sitting at his own table. My father, the man who had spent 40 years managing the whispers of Manhattan's wealth, looked like he had been struck by lightning. The mask of the grieving, betrayed parent had slipped, revealing the terrified predator underneath who had finally been caught in his own trap. The judge did not wait for an answer they did not have. He informed the room that he had been reading the business journals with his coffee that morning. He spoke about a hidden unicorn in the operational technology sector, a firm that had just secured an exclusivity contract with the government to overhaul the life support safety protocols for 3 major regional hospital systems. He looked at the paperwork again and announced that the value of that contract was $200 million. A collective gasp went through the gallery, shifting the air in the room. It was not from the reporters. It was from my father. Kevin turned to stare at me, and for the first time in 36 years, I saw him truly see me. He did not see a daughter he could discard, or a hobbyist he could mock. He saw a shark that had been swimming beneath his feet for a decade. He realized in that moment that he was not trying to crush a lemonade stand. He was trying to bulldoze a bunker. The judge announced that he was dismissing the involuntary bankruptcy petition, effective immediately. He did not just dismiss it. He dismissed it with prejudice. That meant Tyler and Kevin were permanently barred from ever filing another claim against me regarding this fiction of a debt. But he was not finished. He declared that this court had been used as an instrument of personal destruction and corporate sabotage. He pointed to the email Tyler had sent during the hearing, the one referencing Philadelphia, and said the consequences would not be civil, they would be criminal. He ordered the marshals to secure the room. I watched as 2 men in uniforms stepped toward the plaintiff's table. Tyler's smirking confidence was gone. He looked like a small, spoiled boy caught in a fire he had started himself to stay warm. He began to shout that it was not fair, that it was his money, that I was supposed to fail. He screamed that he just wanted me to know my place, that he just wanted to break me. The confession rang through the high-ceilinged room, echoing off the wood. He had admitted his malice on the federal record. The judge looked at my brother with utter disgust and ordered the marshals to escort him out. As Tyler was led away in handcuffs for wire fraud and identity theft, the Hawthorne dynasty, built on appearances and expensive handshakes, crumbled in less than 2 hours. I stood up slowly and buttoned my blazer. My legs were steady, my heart was calm. Kevin took a step toward me in the marble hallway outside, his voice ragged and trembling. He called me daughter. He begged me to call off the lawyers, to think of the family, and to save his firm from the federal audit. I looked him in the eye and delivered the final truth that had been burning in my chest for 8 years. I told him that I was not his daughter today. I was the chief executive officer of Northbridge Biotech. I told him that families argue at dinner, and families fight over holidays, but families do not hire strangers to bankrupt each other in front of the entire city. I walked away and did not look back. I had walked into that building as a defendant, but I was walking out as a victor. I finally realized that the best revenge was not destroying them. It was becoming everything they said I could not be. And watching them realize they never had the power to stop me. The cool Manhattan breeze hit my face as I stepped out of the courthouse, and for the first time in 8 years, I did not feel like I was holding my breath. The flashbulbs were still popping, and reporters were shouting questions about national security and family betrayal, but their voices sounded like white noise. Behind me, the heavy brass doors of the federal building were a physical barrier between my past and my future. I hailed a cab, and as we pulled away, I watched the silhouettes of my parents through the rear window. They were standing alone in the marble hallway, looking at the back of the child they had tried to devour. The liquidation of the Hawthorne legacy began by sunset. The Securities and Exchange Commission did not wait for a formal invitation. Within 48 hours, federal agents were at the doors of my father's fund on the Upper East Side. The $4,800,000 he had embezzled to cover Tyler's failures was just the tip of a very cold iceberg. My father had built his entire identity on the illusion of power, but it was a power he had only rented with other people's money. I watched from my office as his firm collapsed, and his wealthy friends vanished like smoke in a windstorm. This was the reality of the illusion of power from an empty wallet. For years, Kevin and Kimberly believed that their social standing made them untouchable. They thought that expensive suits and country club memberships were the same thing as character. But once the capital was gone, the facade crumbled instantly. They did not have a foundation. They had a costume. When the money stopped flowing, they were just two desperate people in a large, empty house, realizing too late that status is a luxury that requires a steady bank balance to maintain. Without the funds to buy silence and loyalty, they were left with nothing but the judgment of a city that values success above all else. Tyler did not fare any better. The Crown Prince of Manhattan exchanged his tailored blazers for a jumpsuit in a federal holding cell. His confession on the record that he simply wanted to break me was the final nail in his coffin. He had not just committed wire fraud, he had admitted to malicious intent against a federal contractor. The legal fees for his defense began to drain what little remained of the family's legitimate assets. As for me, I returned to my laboratory. The $200 million exclusivity contract with the government was finalized 3 weeks later. But the victory was not in the money. It was in the transformation. I am no longer the daughter seeking a seat at their table. I am the woman who built her own table. And I am making sure there is room for others. I established the Hope Foundation for Underestimated Women, a fund dedicated to providing capital and legal protection for female founders whose dreams have been dismissed as hobbies. I walked onto my balcony overlooking the city skyline, the lights of the grid twinkling below me like the nervous system I had sworn to protect. The silence of my new life is not a prison, it is a sanctuary. I realized then that sometimes the most potent revenge is not the destruction of your enemies, but the creation of a legacy that makes them irrelevant. I spent 28 years trying to be useful to them. Now, I am finally essential to myself. If you have ever been told your dreams were just a hobby, type unstoppable in the comments. Don't forget to like and share this story to support anyone currently fighting for their own table. See you in the next reckoning.